That night, I only wanted one thing, to hear my son's voice. It was Friday, almost 8 p.m. The scent of chamomile tea was already wafting through the kitchen, and I had gathered some old photos to show him. He loved reminiscing about his childhood, especially those trips to the lake house. But instead, it was she who called. Samantha. My daughter-in-law. Or, as she referred to herself, Michael's new wife. She started laughing. A short, somewhat forced laugh. She said it was just to let you know, we got married today. It was something simple. Just for special people. I stopped stirring the tea. My body froze. What do you mean, special people? What was I then? She didn't even leave room for a question. She kept talking, spilling details like someone sharing gossip with an acquaintance, not the groom's mother. Or rather, the ex-fiancéess. Because now they were married. And I was the last to know. There was no invitation. There was no warning. There wasn't even a message from Michael. My only son. The one for whom I gave up my career, my youth, my dreams. Now he was a married man, and I was just a faint line outside the altar. Immediately, I wanted to hang up. But my hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the button. Samantha even said something about respecting their space, that it was better this way, more intimate. I just responded with an, "Oh, I see." But of course I didn't. None of it made sense. Not the rush, not the secrecy, not the cold tone of that call. But what really scared me came later. A few days passed, and Michael's silence was deafening. The house felt different. Cold. Empty. It almost felt like something had left it. Or entered it, I couldn't tell. Until I received a new message. This time, written. Short, direct, without longing. Hi, Helen. We're a little tight here. Can you transfer the rent this month? That's when I realized that this call wasn't just about marriage. It was about courtship. It was about control. It was about keeping out anyone who might see too much. And the worst part? Michael hadn't said a single word yet. It was as if he wasn't there anymore. Not only far from me, but far from yourself. And I needed to understand what happened to my son. What made him shut up like that? And why did everything inside me say that something much bigger was behind this? If you've ever felt left out by someone who created you with so much love, if you've ever had that feeling that something just isn't right, even if no one will admit it, this story will touch you deeply. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and comment. Have you ever felt that someone close to you came back very different? I'll read everything later, okay? Because what happened after that message? Everything changed. That's when I walked into Michael's room. And I saw that he had left more than memories behind. At first, I tried not to theorize. I thought maybe it was just a phase. A misunderstanding. Maybe he felt pressured. Or nervous about his new married life. I repeated this to myself for 3 whole days. As if repeating a lie 1,000 times made it true. But absence carries weight. And silence, when it comes from a child, it hurts in a place no words can reach. Michael didn't call me. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not even when I sent that message with 3 simple words. Everything is fine. Not even that. Nothing. And what hurt me most wasn't the lack of response, but the absence of any sign of hesitation. As if erasing me from his life had been natural. As if our history could be erased with a click. And I started to feel a strange kind of emptiness here at home. It wasn't just longing. It was something else. More intense. As if time had stopped. As if something had broken inside. I walked through the rooms and felt like the air was heavier. The smell of coffee seemed different. Even the paintings on the wall seemed to stare back at me, with pity. That's when I decided to go into his room. I hadn't opened the door in months. It was our agreement, to leave everything as he left it until he returned. And I respected that with every fiber of my being. But that afternoon, after recalling that message from Sam asking for money as if nothing had happened, something pushed me. Literally. My feet walked on their own. And when I opened the door, the air inside was still, cold, as if the room had been sealed in time. The curtains were closed, the bed made just the way he liked it, everything meticulously the same as the day he left. Except for one detail. The picture frame on the shelf was turned around. I thought it was strange. That picture was his favorite, the two of us at the lake, him 7 years old, messy hair, a smile I'd give anything to see again. I turned the picture over. And I almost dropped it on the floor. Someone had drawn a black marker across his face. 3 lines. One across each eye. One across the middle of his mouth. I stood there for long seconds, trying to process that. That wasn't just strange. It was symbolic. It was a message. But whose? And why? I considered calling Sam right away, but I knew I wouldn't get an answer. And even if she did, I doubt she'd admit anything. Everything about her has always been full of disguises. Rehearsed smiles. Canned responses. The kind of person who manipulates situations with the calm of someone who already knows the endgame. It was there that a new sensation was born in me. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was alert. And that's a huge difference. Because when we wake up to the truth, everything around us changes. Details start to make sense. Absence stops feeling like a distraction and starts to smell like strategy. Longing becomes a clue. Silence becomes an answer. And what was once a "he must be busy" becomes a "what are they hiding from me?" That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair, staring at my phone as if it would ring at any second. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't. Michael was too distant. And it wasn't just geographical. It was as if he were on another frequency. Another plane. As if I was trying to reach someone who was no longer him. There was a moment, between one thought and another, that I swear I heard footsteps in the hallway. 3 steps. Paused. Heavy. The kind he took when he arrived late, trying not to wake me. But it wasn't possible. I was alone. I got up slowly. The hallway was dark, but one of the doors at the end was ajar. The one to the basement. I never left that door open. Never. I went over there, turned on the light. Nothing. But the air was colder. Much colder than the rest of the house. And it was at that moment that something in me changed. A kind of instinct. Intuition. Call it what you will. It was as if a part of me whispered, Michael needs help. And Sam isn't going to give it. I began to search through everything I could. Old emails. Papers. Photos. And each thing I found seemed to confirm what I feared. This story was much bigger than it seemed. Much darker, too. It wasn't just about marriage. Or family feuds. There was something hidden. Something no one had the courage to say out loud. I just didn't imagine that, to discover the truth, I would have to open old wounds. Wounds that I didn't even know were still alive. And when I found that letter, handwritten, with his name at the top, and undated, I realized this journey was just beginning. The letter was folded in 4, hidden deep in the wooden box where he kept important things. His name was handwritten on the top. Michael A. Baker. The handwriting was undoubtedly his. But there was something off. Something in the strokes, the way the words seemed uncertain, as if he'd written them in a hurry, or out of fear of interruption. The lines weren't straight. They had a slight wobble. And that, coming from someone as meticulous as Michael, was a sign. If you're reading this, I've gone too far. That was the first sentence. And the impact was immediate. The room seemed to shrink. I sat on the floor, right there near the bookshelf, the letter trembling in my hands. The next few lines spoke of a trip he'd taken alone, months before meeting Sam. He said something happened back then. An encounter. A place. But he never explained exactly what. He only left clues. Loose words like voice, wrong choice, sacrifice. It was as if he wanted to tell it, but something was stopping him from saying it outright. And more disturbing than the words were the silences between them. I finished reading and stood there, silent as well, with that feeling that I had just opened the door to a part of my son's life I'd never known. As if there was a version of him I'd never seen. A version marked by something hidden between the lines. A hidden truth, buried beneath the routine, the appearance, the happy family he seemed to have with Sam. That night, the house was even colder. And it wasn't just the weather. It was as if the air had changed texture. I closed all the windows, checked the boiler, even left the furnace on for a while. Nothing helped. It seemed like the cold was coming from inside. And there was something else. I started hearing things. Low sounds. Light sounds. Like someone walking around upstairs in socks. But the upstairs was empty. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just in my head. Old age. Imagination. But then it came again. And again. At different times. Always the same 3 steps. Slow. Paused. Like Michael's when he came home from work tired and didn't want to wake anyone. The sensation was so vivid that I began to wait for the footsteps. Sometimes I even stopped breathing for a few seconds, just to hear them better. And when they came, it was as if time froze. No cars passed outside. No neighbors made a sound. Not even the clock on the wall continued to tick. It was as if the entire house had entered a kind of suspension, as if in tune with something that could not be explained. I began to notice details. Small things. The cup I'd left upside down on the drainer would turn upside down in the morning. The living room chair that was slightly pulled out. The throw on the couch with a different fold. None of this could be the work of the wind. Or a faulty memory. It was subtle, yes. But insistent. Constant. As if someone or something was trying to manifest itself, but still didn't have the courage to fully appear. And then there was the night at the window. The one in Michael's room. I never opened that window because it was difficult to close and let in too much draft. But it was open when I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the distinct sound of something banging against the wall. I got up, went over, and saw the curtain fluttering, even though there was no wind. Outside, a clear sky and a moon so bright it illuminated half the garden. I closed the window, but as I turned to leave, I felt a chill so strong down my back that I had to hold on to the dresser. There, for a brief moment, I had the impression that I was no longer alone in that room. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. But my whole body knew. And our bodies know. Before the mind rationalizes, before logic tries to explain, the body feels. And mine had been feeling for days. And it was at this point in my journey that the word presence began to take on a new meaning for me. It was no longer about who was or wasn't in the house. It was about what remained, even after everything said it was gone. It was about what resonated in the walls, in the objects, in the air. It was about layers that not everyone perceives, but that scream when we begin to truly listen. I began to wonder if Michael's silence was a choice, or a cry for help. And what's more, if Sam knew. Or worse, if she was part of it. That's when I made a decision. I needed to stop waiting for answers. And start looking for them. Even if it meant opening doors that no one else wants to open. After that strange early morning, with the window open and that thick feeling in the air, I spent the rest of the night awake. The clock read 4:28 a.m. when my phone vibrated on the kitchen table. I didn't touch it right away. I stared at the lit screen, illuminating the dark table like a small, solitary beacon. It was a message from Sam. "Hi, Helen. We're a bit tight. Can you send me the rent for this month?" I read that sentence about 5 times. I don't know what hurt more, the request itself, coming as naturally as someone asking to borrow sugar, or the tone of forced intimacy. As if nothing had happened. As if the secret marriage, Michael's silence, the contempt masked by kindness, all of it had evaporated. And now she was back, with a request that felt more like a demand. My first reaction was disbelief. I stood there, cell phone in hand, my heart beating slowly, as if time had stopped. I had just found a letter written by my son, with choked words and traces of someone distraught. I was hearing strange sounds around the house, sensing presences I couldn't name. And in the midst of all this, she appears asking for money? But the most surprising thing is that, for a brief moment, my instinct was to say yes. Out of habit. Out of that mindset many mothers of my generation have, that helping is our obligation. Even when we're the ones hurt. Even when the request comes with a hint of manipulation. And that's how many of us stay in unbalanced relationships for years, because we confuse love with debt. But something inside me said no. Not out loud, but with a firm silence. The kind of no that comes after a long time of silence. Because that message wasn't just a financial request. It was a test. An emotional thermometer. A way to measure whether I was still in the same place. Available, submissive, trapped in the idea that I needed to be useful to be loved. I didn't answer right away. I went to my room, opened the closet where I keep my old albums, and sat on the floor. I needed to remember who I was before the pain. Before Michael's silence. Before the forced separation. Each photo was a piece of me I thought I'd lost. And at the same time, a reminder of everything I'd endured. It was at that moment that it dawned on me. Sam's message was a reflection of a larger structure. A pattern that repeated itself. Where I gave and the world took. Where I loved, and the world turned its back. Where I remained silent, and the world abused my silence. I went back to the kitchen, reread the message, and instead of replying, I started writing a text of my own. Not to her, but to myself. A kind of liberation letter. A personal manifesto. Where I wrote down all the times I'd been annulled in the name of peace. All the times I'd swallowed my words so as not to hurt those who didn't care about hurting me. All the times I'd felt like a spare part in other people's lives. But make no mistake, this didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. With the maturity of someone who no longer needs to shout to be heard. And that's where true transformation begins. When we understand that our worth doesn't depend on the validation of those who can't see it. I put my phone aside, made some coffee, and stared out the window, as if waiting for a reply that hadn't even arrived. But I knew something had changed. And that, from then on, Sam would notice. Because there's a kind of absence that weighs more heavily than any words. The absence of someone who was always there, and decides not to be. The next afternoon, I found a yellow envelope in my mailbox. No return address. No stamp. Just my name, written in thin letters. Helen. The paper looked aged, as if it had been stored for a long time. Inside was a single folded sheet with 3 sentences. Who will protect you? But he couldn't get out. Now he needs you to see. My fingers froze. The handwriting wasn't familiar. But the energy was. Those words carried something I couldn't explain. A silent urgency. A cry for help disguised as a riddle. I knew there was more to this note than meets the eye. And in that instant, the house went eerily quiet. No sound. No cars. No wind. No clock. As if time itself had stopped to listen to me read it. And maybe it really did stop. Because something there changed the direction of my journey. It wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about going all the way. Even if that end was a place no one ever wanted to look. I climbed the stairs as if treading on a floor that was no longer mine. Each step seemed to make a different sound than usual, drier, more hollow, as if the wood held some secret. The anonymous letter was still in my hand, half crumpled between my fingers, as if my body didn't want to let go of that warning. He wanted to protect you. But he couldn't let go. Now he needs you to see. Those words repeated inside my head with the rhythm of a prayer, but without any comfort. When I reached Michael's bedroom door, I sensed something had changed. The doorknob was colder than the rest of the house. The air around it seemed suspended, dense, almost still. I pushed the door slowly. It creaked with a sharp sound, as if it were being opened for the first time in years. But I knew I'd been there just a few days before. I knew I'd closed everything properly. Even so, the curtains were slightly open. The morning light filtered through in streaks, revealing tiny dust particles dancing in the air. And there, in that absolute silence, I realized the room was trying to tell me something. I approached the bookshelf. The same place where the frame with our favorite photo stood. He and I at the lake, in a summer long ago, when everything seemed simpler. But something was wrong. The painting was turned around again. And this time, I was sure I hadn't moved it. I held the frame carefully, feeling a symbolic weight that went beyond the object. I turned it slowly. And there it was. Michael's face, scratched out. It wasn't just any scratch. It was necessary. 3 dark lines, drawn with something thick, maybe a permanent marker or even charcoal. A cross over the eyes. A single line across the mouth. I gasped for a few seconds. This wasn't childish vandalism. It wasn't an accident. This was a symbol. A message. Someone wanted me to see it. Someone wanted to silence him. To erase his vision. To steal his voice. My mind struggled to find rational explanations. But my body already knew. And the body always knows first. I was shaking. My hands were sweating. A slight dizziness crept up the back of my neck and onto my forehead. And then, something even more disturbing. The sound of breathing. Faint. Stiff. Very close. I turned my head slowly, taking in the entire room. There was no one there. But the sound was still there. As if someone were behind me, watching, waiting. I took 2 steps back, and the wood floor creaked. It was the same sound I'd heard at night. 3 footsteps. Slow. Low. But now they weren't just upstairs. They were with me. I closed my eyes for a second. A part of me wanted to run. But another part, the oldest, most maternal, stopped me. Because amidst all that fear, there was a painful certainty. Michael was trapped. Not physically, perhaps. But emotionally, spiritually, energetically. He wasn't the same anymore. And everything around me seemed to conspire to make me understand this. I sat on the edge of the bed. I ran my hand over the sheet, feeling the fabric he'd chosen himself, that navy blue pattern with fine stripes. I could almost hear his voice saying that blue gave a sense of order. He'd always been that way, methodical, organized. And now, he was absent in a way that no amount of disorganization in the world could explain. I got up, opened the dresser drawer, and found a black folder. Inside were work papers, notes, and an unmarked envelope. It was a letter written by him. But this time, not to me. The first words were to Sam. And as I read them, I realized the story I'd been told was full of holes. He spoke of regret. Of forced decisions. Of something he'd seen and couldn't forget. He said he'd been part of something too big to comprehend. And that he now carried a burden no one could lift. The words were jumbled, but charged with emotion. And there was one passage that struck me. Sometimes I feel like I'm here, but not whole. Like a part of me stayed in that place. Like someone was using me. Like I was a memory of myself. I closed my eyes and, for a moment, I wished I'd never read it. Because there were things we'd rather not know. Truths that shake the very fabric of reality. But there was no turning back. The door was open. The journey had begun. And as much as I feared what lay ahead, I knew I had to keep going. Because there was something waiting for me. Something perhaps only a mother could find. It took me 2 days to digest that letter. I reread the most confusing passages like someone searching for patterns in clouds, hoping a new word would emerge from it all, like a secret password. But all I saw was pain. A silent pain, disguised as a confession. And with each line, it became clearer to me. Michael hadn't just disappeared from my life. He had disappeared from himself. It was only on the 3rd day, between a bad night's sleep and a morning that was too cold for spring, that I decided to call Sam. I knew she wasn't expecting my call. In fact, I was sure she was counting on my silence, the same silence she'd helped establish between me and my son. She answered on the second ring, as if she were expecting something, or someone. Her voice sounded sweet, artificial, almost professional. "Hi, Helen. What a surprise." Surprise. I took a deep breath. That word made me feel sick. So much could be hidden behind such a small word. I asked directly, "Is he okay?" There was a second of silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from someone who didn't hear correctly, but from someone who needs to construct a lie in real time. "Sure. It's great. Just quieter, you know? Spending some time with himself. He doesn't talk to anyone anymore. Not even to me sometimes. But it's a phase. Men have these things, right?" I had to hold my breath to keep my feelings from showing. That response was rehearsed, stitched together from scraps of shallow apologies. The light tone was forced, as if she'd been trained to calm chaos without resolving anything. The kind of calm that irritates more than it consoles. But what froze me was the way she said, "He doesn't talk to anyone now." It wasn't a complaint. Not a lament. It was an observation. Almost a warning. As if it wanted to tell me, there's no point in trying, he's out of reach. I swallowed hard. My mind raced. I'd seen his shaky handwriting, the words about being used, not whole. I'd felt the presence in the room. The cold that permeated the walls. The footsteps. The note. And now, this woman was telling me he was okay? Silently, but okay? I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Because when we feel we're close to a hidden truth, screaming is useless. The strategy is to listen. It's to collect signals. It's to stay standing. So I continued. I asked if he was working, if he'd returned to the office, if his friends knew anything. She said he preferred to take a break, that he was more introspective, and that he didn't want anyone to disturb him. Beautiful words for something that smelled like emotional kidnapping. I hung up the call with a tightness in my chest that wasn't just sadness. It was unease. It was that feeling you get when you realize you're being deceived, and that the deceiver is smiling. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at my phone's blank screen. I wished I'd had a camera on, so I could recapture her every micro-expression, every hesitation. Because, deep down, I knew, this woman wasn't just hiding information. She was hiding an entire reality. And it was there, sitting in that chair that creaks when I lean forward, that I realized this story wasn't just about my son and me anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and perhaps something even deeper, something that went beyond the limits of what's visible. It was as if there existed a parallel dimension between what she was saying and what was really happening. A shadowy backroom where decisions were being made far from the eyes of those who truly care. I returned to Michael's room that same night. I turned on the bedside lamp. I sat down. I left the phone on the bedspread and waited. I didn't know what exactly. I just waited. Deep down, I sensed his silence wasn't passivity. It was a kind of prison. As if he were trying to scream from within, but the wall between us was being built every day by someone who knew exactly where to place the bricks. The letter. The scratched portrait. The note. The conversation. Everything connected, but there was still one piece missing. Something that would explain how a man like Michael, centered, sensitive, full of life, had become a ghost. A specter. A present body with an absent soul. And then, on an impulse I didn't even understand, I got up and went to the garage. I opened his toolbox. Inside, among wrenches and pieces of electrical tape, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A small portable recorder. Old, with a red rec button and tape still inside. The kind of thing he used as a teenager to record song ideas or lyrics. I turned on the player. There was only one recording. When I pressed play, I heard static first. Then a voice. My son's voice. Low. hoarse, as if he were speaking in the dark. If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. My heart stopped for a moment. He continued. She knows where I am. But she's not the one holding me. It's something else. Something that started before her. And now I can't get out. I stopped recording. I dropped it on the floor. Because in that moment I understood. I was no longer looking for answers. I was about to enter territory where they might not want to be found. The recording still echoed inside me when I went to sleep that night. Or at least, I tried to sleep. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, low, drawn out, as if coming from somewhere between the world of the living and the world of the as yet unnamed. She knows where I am. But she's not the one holding me back. That sentence stuck in my throat. Sam was the shield. But she wasn't the source. She was the disguise. And now I was certain, something much bigger and darker was behind Michael's silence. Something that couldn't be explained by therapy, routine, or family hurts. There was a force there I didn't understand. But now, I felt it. That morning, I got out of bed shortly after 3 in the morning. Not because I was insomniac, but because of a sound. A call. It was as if someone had whispered my name, twice, very close to my ear. I looked around, but the room was empty. The window was closed. The streetlights filtered through the curtains. Everything was still. But the sound was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a thought. And deep down, I already knew who had called me. I descended the stairs slowly. The floor felt cold, even with the heaters on. Each step emitted a dry sound, as if the house were breathing slowly but laboredly. When I reached the hallway, I realized I hadn't turned on any lights. And yet, I could see quite clearly. A strange, bluish shadow, coming from nowhere, outlined the furniture like in an old movie. And amidst that muffled light, I heard it again. Mom. The voice was his. Clearly his. But different. As if coming from far away. It carried a hoarseness that wasn't physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. A voice that traversed dimensions. That didn't use the mouth. That came from a place where time no longer had a name. I'm here. It sounded close. Very close. It came from the hallway, near the basement door. The same place where, days before, I'd felt that intense cold. And there, standing a few feet away, I saw the doorknob turn slightly. Alone. No wind. No one. But I can't leave. The final sentence came like a blade of ice piercing his chest. Because there was no desperation in his voice. There was resignation. As if he had already accepted his imprisonment. As if saying it was the most effort he could muster. I had to lean against the wall. My breath was shallow, my heart racing. My hands were cold, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. A kind of recognition. Because deep down, even without fully understanding, I knew. My son was trapped somewhere unseen. And somehow, that house was the connection. I went to the door. The same one from the basement. The same one that always creaks. But this time, it opened without a sound. Absolute silence pervaded everything. As if the world had held its breath. I descended the steps in slow motion. The wood was damp. The smell was strong. Not of mold, but of something older. Earth. Iron. Old blood. I can't explain it. But it was a smell that brought back memories that weren't mine. As if that place had absorbed stories no one had ever told. Downstairs, in the darkest corner, sat an old suitcase. Leather. The same one my husband used on business trips decades ago. But I knew it hadn't been there before. I approached slowly, knelt, and opened it. Inside were objects that didn't belong to our family. A broken crucifix. A clock stuck at 3:17. A torn diary page with just one handwritten sentence. He was chosen. But he wasn't warned. It made me recoil. Not because of the object itself, but because of the energy emanating from it. It was as if each item in that bag was a vestige of an ancient pact. An unspoken agreement. Something made long before any of us were born, but now, somehow, exacting its toll. I walked back slowly, my legs trembling. As I climbed the stairs, I heard his voice again. This time, whispering my name urgently. As if he knew I was near. As if that small gesture, opening that suitcase, had triggered something. A release. Or maybe, a trigger. When I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed that every light in the house was on. All of it. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. And I swear I turned them all off before I went down. On the kitchen floor, right in the center of the rug, was something written in what looked like ash. You heard me. Yes. I heard. And now, there was no turning back. That morning when I saw those words drawn in ash on the kitchen rug, you heard me, I didn't feel fear. At least not the paralyzing kind. What I felt was a quiet conviction, as if some dormant part of me had finally awakened. I had spent weeks trying to understand, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have no edges. But now, everything was starting to make sense. Not logically, but truthfully. That message wasn't just a warning. It was permission. Yes, I heard. And more than that, I was ready to act. The time for waiting for answers was over. And the Helen who used to bow her head to keep the peace, she no longer lived here. What remained now was another version of me. A woman who had navigated the silence, the contempt, the emptiness, and who now walked back, not to ask, but to recover. I spent the day without leaving the house. With each room I cleaned, I felt like I was preparing the groundwork. Something told me that cleaning wasn't just physical. That each rearranged object, each open door, each ventilated window, were ways to move stagnant energies. I needed the house to be mine again before any confrontation. It was as if I were dislodging the invisible presence that had slowly taken over everything, like weeds growing under the floorboards. Late in the afternoon, I wrote the message. Short. Accurate. Come get something that is yours. And I sent it to Sam. No greeting. No emojis. No explanation. It took 7 minutes for her to respond. What thing? I left her silent. Because when the truth is about to be revealed, silence speaks louder. She tried again, with a simple question mark. But I had already made up my mind. The next line would be hers. In person. Face to face. No screens. No rehearsed excuses. I prepared the room with the same care as one would prepare a stage. I turned off the main light and left only the lamps on. The reading chair in the corner, where I always sat to wait for Michael to get home from work, would now be my throne. The suitcase from the basement, the one containing the objects that weren't mine or his, was on the coffee table, closed. Beside it, the tape recorder. The tape stopped precisely at the part of his voice. The whole room was charged, yet balanced. As if everything was in its right place so that the next act of the story could unfold. By the time the intercom rang, the sky had already darkened. But the night didn't seem ordinary. It was dense. No wind, no birdsong, no distant car noise. It was as if the world outside had been paused, just so that this moment could unfold without distractions. I opened the door and there she was. Sam. She wore the same beige coat she'd worn the day of her mother's funeral, but now it was slightly wrinkled, as if she'd thrown it on in a hurry. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, her eyes red, not from crying, but from insomnia. She entered with a nervous smile, trying to appear casual, but her gaze scanned the room suspiciously. Hi, Helen. What did you mean by that message? I jerked my head toward the living room. She hesitated for a second, as if her body knew before her mind that she was about to enter hostile territory. But she did. She sat on the sofa with the defensive posture of someone already feeling accused. And he remained silent, waiting. I walked over to the suitcase, opened it slowly, and let her see everything. The broken crucifix. The clock stopped. The sheet with the phrase about the chosen one who was not warned. And finally, the recorder. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She took a moment. She took a deep breath. She avoided my gaze. And answered with another question. "Where did you find this?" Her voice cracked a little. It was no longer steady. Her control was beginning to slip through her fingers. Her mask was beginning to crack. "In the basement," I replied. "But that answer is the least important here. The real question is, why was it there?" She didn't answer. But her silence spoke louder than any explanation. It was the kind of silence you hear when someone is caught between what they've tried to hide and what they can no longer control. I walked back to the chair, pressed the recorder button, and let Michael's voice fill the room. The same phrase that had been haunting me for nights. "She knows where I am. But she's not the one holding me back." When the recording ended, I looked at Sam. Her eyes were different. Not scared. Not guilty. But empty. As if something inside had disconnected. And then she murmured something so low I almost didn't hear it. It was supposed to be with someone else. The sentence floated in the air like smoke. And I knew then and there that what I had faced so far was just the edge of the abyss. And the real dive was about to begin. Her sentence hung in the air, as if time itself had stopped to listen. It was supposed to be with someone else. She didn't repeat it. She didn't explain. And for some reason, that hit me harder than any excuse. Because there was something in that whisper. Something that wasn't just guilt. It was defeat. It was the kind of confession that doesn't come from logic. It comes from the exhaustion of someone who can no longer sustain their own act. She lowered her eyes. I instinctively remained still. As if any movement of mine could shatter that fragile bubble of revealing silence. And suddenly, without another word, Sam stood up and left. Without responding, without looking back. She just grabbed her bag and walked away, as if running away from herself. The door closed behind her with a soft sound. And the house looked different. For the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of stillness that didn't bother me. The air was still dense, but it was a different kind of density. As if the energy had shifted. As if that last sentence, that near whisper, had unlocked an invisible gear. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I left the house plunged into darkness. I made a cup of tea, sat in the corner of the living room, and just waited. Not for answers, but for presence. It wasn't about understanding everything anymore. It was about to feel what was left. And just before 3 in the morning, she came. It wasn't a sound. Not a smell. It was a filled void, a kind of absence that wasn't absence. A clear impression that someone was there, with me. Not as a ghost. Not as a shadow. But as truth. A profound, ancestral truth. One that isn't expressed with words, but imposes itself in silence. I got up, walked to his room, and opened the door without turning on the light. The window was open. The early morning breeze gently blew in, gently moving the curtains. And on the bed, there was nothing. No blanket, no pillow. Just the smooth, taut sheet, as if it had never been used. I went to the bookshelf and saw that the picture frame was gone. On the shelf, in its place, there was only an envelope. White. With my name handwritten in it. It was his handwriting. I opened it calmly. Inside, a single sheet of paper, with a short sentence. "Now I can go. Thank you for listening to me." I didn't cry. For the first time, I didn't cry. Because I felt, with a strength I'd never felt before, that he had been freed. And I'm not talking about the liberation the living feel when they heal. I'm talking about the kind that transcends the flesh, that goes beyond the body, time, and names. The kind that only happens when pain is acknowledged and embraced. Michael didn't leave. Michael went freed. The next day, I sent Sam another message. My last one. I just wrote, "Come get what's yours." I left the house open. On the living room table, I placed the original contract for the house. In his name. I signed it 14 years ago, when I decided to transfer everything to him as a sign of love. And next to it, I handwrote, in bold letters, "Now he's truly gone." I didn't say anything else. Because it wasn't necessary. When she arrived, I was no longer there. I went to the lake house. The one where Michael fished on Sundays, as a child, with his blue cap turned backward. The house still smelled of old wood and brewed coffee. But the air was different. Light. Clean. And I knew he would come again. Not with words. But with presence. I spent days without touching the phone. Without turning on the TV. Without telling anyone. This was a part of our story the world didn't need to understand. Because sometimes the truth doesn't want to be debated. It just wants to be felt. And it was sitting on that porch, barefoot and listening to the sound of the lake gently swaying, that I realized, some journeys don't end happily. They end peacefully. And peace, sometimes, tastes like longing, smells like dawn, and sounds of silent footsteps. But inside I knew. He was gone. And this time, by choice. What remained now was another kind of silence. Not the silence of absence. But the silence of healing. Time on the lake doesn't pass the same way. It flows differently. As if each minute carries a lighter, more honest weight. Sometimes I sit on the porch and let my eyes wander in the water's reflection. And it's always in this damp silence that truth reappears, not as an answer, but as a presence. In the early days, I would still wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear footsteps. It was instinct. An echo of what I'd experienced for weeks. But little by little, that impulse turned into something else. It became prayer. It became gratitude. Because when we go through something the world doesn't understand, we learn to communicate with the invisible in a different way. And it was here that I began to piece together, for the first time, the fragments of everything this story left behind. Not as pain, but as revelation. There's something no one teaches us. That absence is sometimes just a different form of presence. That not every departure is a loss. And that not all silence is abandonment. Sometimes, silence is care. It's protection. It's a final gesture of love from someone who no longer has words. And that's what I understood about Michael. For a long time, I thought he'd forgotten me. That the world, Sam, the routine, had erased me from my role as a mother. But now I see things differently. He didn't forget me. He protected me. In his own way. With the tools he had. With choices that perhaps weren't all his. Because sometimes, the people we love most become prisoners of things we can't see. Of old fears. Of pacts they didn't make. Of burdens they inherited without knowing it. And when that happens, love changes shape. It ceases to be a physical presence and transforms into intuition, into small signs, into whispers that only those who listen with their hearts can understand. It's no longer the love that embraces. It's the love that watches from afar. That cares in silence. That waits. Today, I understand that what connected us wasn't the dates, the phone calls, the birthdays, or the Sunday hugs. It was the invisible bond between two souls who chose to love each other, even when the world tried to tear them apart. And I want to tell you this calmly, if you feel like someone important has left you, erased you, forgotten you, maybe it's not quite like that. Maybe that person kept quiet because they didn't know how to move on. Because they were fighting inside against something bigger than you could imagine. Maybe they never left. Maybe they're there, in the form of longing, a dream, a memory, telling you every day, I still love you. I just didn't know how to show it. Of course, pain exists. And abandonment, even when unintentional, hurts. But there comes a time when we have to decide what to do with that pain. Whether we'll let it bury us, or whether we'll transform it into something sacred. I chose to transform. I chose to look at this story as a process of liberation. Not just his, but mine as well. Because in the end, True love isn't about control. It's about allowing. Allowing the other person to move on. Allowing the soul to find peace. Allowing the cycle to complete itself, even if it hurts. And do you know what the most beautiful part of all this is? Because when we accept this kind of truth, life begins to give us back, in other forms, what we thought we'd lost. Sometimes it's an unexpected phone call. A dream so real we wake up crying. An object that appears out of nowhere. A song that plays at exactly the right time. These small, everyday miracles are the universe's way of reminding us that no one ever leaves completely. That love doesn't disappear. It changes clothes. It changes languages. But it remains there, steadfast. Eternal. The other day, while tidying a drawer in the lake house, I found a note I hadn't even remembered keeping. It was from Michael. Written in pencil on a torn piece of paper when he was maybe 12. It said, "Mom, if I disappear, look for me in heaven. But I'll come back. I always come back to you." And in that instant, I understood everything. He hadn't disappeared. He'd just returned in a different form. A form that taught me more about the human soul than any book, any advice, any religion. Because, sometimes, whoever forgets you in life is no longer here. But what true love builds, this, neither time, nor silence, nor death can erase. And if you've stuck with me this far, thank you. Truly. I know it's not easy to go through stories like this. They touch us in places we often didn't even know were open. But maybe that's what we need most sometimes. To allow ourselves to feel. To allow ourselves to remember that there's beauty even in pain, and strength in what we thought was weakness. If this video brought you some clarity, some comfort, or even just a sense that you're not alone in this world, subscribe to the channel. Because that's exactly the kind of truth we share here. Unhurried. Unfiltered. Just the way life is. And tell me here in the comments, with a simple sentence, that message was for me. That way I'll know you stayed with me until the end, feeling every word as if it were yours too. Oh, and if this story touched you in any way, please like this video. Sometimes, a small gesture like this shows that the connection was real. There's a video here that complements everything we experienced today. Click and continue with me there. The story isn't over yet.